All right, from this side.
Thank you, both of you. It was great to listen to. I think any Christian would believe that, or we'd have to come to the conclusion that belief in God begs the question. It's a logical fallacy, if we were to argue logically. However, you mentioned that if there are no bridges that bridge the gap, there are no solid gaps or solid bridges from the natural to the supernatural, then there is no reason to believe that the supernatural exists. However, that begs the question, and that is a logical fallacy. So, because you're saying what's begging the question is the existence of the supernatural. You're saying there's no reason to believe it exists. Well, why is there no reason?
You have a question?
My question is, isn't the more conservative answer then to say that you don't know? Which would be the more agnostic view? Because you appeal to conservatism.
Okay, thanks. So, isn't the more conservative answer that we don't know?
Admirably stated. We're back to terminology. Look, folks, when the atheist says, I can't believe in the supernatural, there's reasons for this. The reasons are that the reasons for the existence of supernatural, all, in the atheist's judgment, fail to yield adequate support separately or collectively. Now, if this atheist is pushed and said something like the following, look, for all you know, Mr. Know-it-all atheist, the supernatural might still be waiting there out in the darkness. My reply is, okay, I'm a humble guy. For all I know, yeah. It's logically possible that there could be something supernatural out there. It's logically possible that there's a flying spaghetti monster out there as well. If you were to ask my opinion in a lighter moment, perhaps with a pint in me, what kind of supernatural realm would best explain this crazy world we live in? I would say a committee of very angry gods. I've served on committees. They only botch the work. But enough of this lightheartedness. The agnostic has positioned themselves somehow between the supernaturalist and the naturalist. It's a very difficult no man's land to occupy. On the one hand, the agnostic seems to very cleverly make themselves seem smarter than the atheist when the agnostic says, I'm the more humble dude here in this fight. I'm telling you, I don't know whether or not the supernatural world exists or not. Now, the atheist can then reply to the agnostic, well, gee, we agree on this. We don't know that it exists. And when we don't know and we don't even have the beginnings of adequate justification for believing it exists, we don't believe that it exists. That is the default position that the agnostic and the atheist shares, and the rest is, I think, more emotional force and rhetoric that allows the agnostic to think that they're somehow smarter or more humble than the atheist. I fail to see any big difference here.
Okay, thanks. Another question from this line here.
Yeah, my question is, well, religion advocates peace and unity. On the other hand, also, they separate people into groups, and that separation into groups leads to war and conflict. So my question is just really simple. Is religion a good thing?
Not necessarily. It depends on which religion you're talking about. I think there's some religions in the world that are truly horrid religions. Voodoo, for example, would be one, I think, that most of us would agree is a very destructive and deleterious religion. And certainly there are lots of examples of other ancient religions that practice child sacrifice and other forms of monstrous ritual practices for their bloodthirsty deities. So I don't think that religion is necessarily a good thing. I'm very disturbed, for example, at fundamentalist Islam and its division of the world into the house of Islam, or the house of submission, and the house of war. And that the house of war are those nations that have yet to be brought forcibly into the house of submission by force of arms and violence if necessary. I agree with the ethic of Jesus of Nazareth, that we should love our neighbors, that we should love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us and despitefully use us. So I think it depends on which religion you're talking about, and the religion I believe is true is the religion taught and modeled by Jesus of Nazareth. And he was not a violent person, someone who would lead a jihad or something of that sort. And when people or Christians supposedly following in his name have done so, I think they've acted in profound inconsistency with what Jesus taught and modeled. So the answer to your question would be no, not necessarily, but some religions, I think, are very, very beneficial.
Thank you. Question from this line.
Okay, my question for you is, you said that there are 3 ways of deducing whether or not something works in the naturalist view, and they are reason, experience, and whatever the other one was.
Science.
Oh,
Okay,
don't
thank you.
forget science, please.
The question I have to ask is, how come you disregard religious experience and our explanation for it that reason cannot explain it? How come you disregard religious experience as a valid view for the notion that God exists? So if you could just please clarify your position.
Sure. 2 main reasons, and I'll be brief because I seem to be covering territory that I've covered previously. The first main reason is because religious experiences are profoundly inconsistent with each other. And by the rational principle that we ought to seek consistency, all of these inconsistent religious experiences, people claiming that they experience this God, that God, the other God, hundreds of gods. How many gods have people claimed to actually have personally experienced or had messages from? Religion encyclopedias fill shelves full of these claims down through the centuries. They're all inconsistent with each other, save where people can manage to get together and form stable churches where they can all try to kind of get their story straight. And even then, it's an immense struggle. The history of Christianity is replete with churches splitting and denominations infighting over whether or not some charismatic leader accurately got a new message or revelation from Jesus correctly. We've witnessed, for example, Mormonism split off from Christianity over the argument over new revelation. The atheist can't handle all of this inconsistency. Again, they all claim to be true. They can't all be true. It's impossible to figure out which one is true. The atheist takes the conservative position that therefore, even though these experiences exist and are fascinating to scientifically study, they tell us nothing solid about the supernatural whatsoever.
Thank you.